Scanning. Identity confirmed. Signal acquired. Initiating transmission. Stand by. Contacting Imperial High Council. Initiating Project Storytime.
Greetings, members of the Imperial High Council, and today we begin our look at Star Trek Enterprise.
Our episode opens up with Jonathan Archer building models with his dad.
The young Jonathan is asking his father about the warp engine project he's working on, and he's clearly irritated by the visiting aliens, the Vulcans.
Bigger than Ambassador Pointy's ship?
His name is Saval, and he's been very helpful. And I told you not to call him that, Jonathan.
You know, it's bold to introduce your series lead as kind of a bigot.
So, Billy Cook, a character that is only ever mentioned once in dialogue, sets up the entire dynamic between humans and Vulcans in this series. The people of Earth, and especially Archer, feel that their progress is being hampered by the Vulcans.
We cut to Broken Bow, Oklahoma, 30 years later. Two Suliban are pursuing a Klingon, and they chase him into a methane silo. They're able to follow him into the silo by demonstrating some of their unique abilities, such as turning into terrible CGI. But the Klingon is a master tactician. He's able to jump out of a random second-story door on a silo, turn around, and shoot it, causing the whole thing to blow up.
Then out comes Old MacDonald with his space shotgun. Cool. He tries to talk to the Klingon, but this is before universal translators, so that conversation goes nowhere. And the farmer treats the Klingon like he were a gopher. Bam! Dead.
Now we get to the main title sequence, and I really like the imagery. The visuals of exploration, aviation, and other vessels named Enterprise are really nice and awe-inspiring. The problem is the song itself. It's bland and generic. It sounds no better than being at a coffee shop at 2 o'clock in the morning with some random beatnik.
Next scene, we are introduced to a now adult Jonathan Archer and another staple character, Charles Tucker III, aka Trip. They are just going over the ship in dry dock. Trip is Jonathan's friend and his chief engineer. The best Starfleet has to offer. They then get a call about a new species of alien that's crashed on Earth that humans have not interacted with yet. Archer travels back to get abreast of the situation.
So Archer meets up with the admirals and the Vulcan delegation as they are discussing what to do about the Klingon Clang. This is where we are introduced to the ticking clock. The Klingons are demanding that Clang be brought back to Kronos immediately. The Vulcans have interceded on Earth's behalf and are going to be taking Clang back as a corpse. They reason that since the Klingons are a warrior race, that means Clang must want to die. Well, that's just logic. The admirals are upset that since this happened on Earth's soil, they should have a say. Archer insists that we can do it! And asks that he be permitted to handle the situation in just 3 days. And in those 3 days, he needs to make sure that his Warp 5 capable ship is capable of Warp 5. It gets stocked, he gets a communication officer to talk to people, and make sure that the injured Klingon and his crew have, well, a doctor on board. Okay, let's just take a moment to talk about this ticking clock plot point. I want to point out that the network mandated that the NX-01 be in space at the start of the series. In our humble little fox's opinion, that was a misstep. We think the series would have benefited from taking its time a little bit.
Yeah, so it would have been nice if they gave some time to introduce what life is like on Earth. Maybe give more details on the politics between Earth, Starfleet, and the Vulcans. They could have introduced other aliens that we'd be seeing in the series. I mean, note, we do see this sort of thing, but it comes way too late. It would have been nice to build up to a grand historical moment of the Enterprise launch. We would have been fine if this was a quarter or even halfway through the series.
Yes, and unfortunately, this is the first of many missed opportunities, and we'll get into some of those missteps later. In the next scene, we meet two more central characters, Malcolm Reed and Travis Mayweather. They are discussing the transporters, which have only recently been approved for human use. Yeah, I don't blame them for being a bit hesitant. They beam up their supplies and find out that they were sent the wrong things. Reed is frustrated because he won't be able to get the weapons online before they launch. Mayweather shows how stupid he is by saying this.
We're just taking a sick man back to his home world. Why do we need weapons?
You're going into the great unknown, and your closest ally warned you that you're dealing with a warrior race that sees honor and death and prefer it to capture. Yeah, why would you need weapons?
We now meet Hoshi Sato, who is an accomplished linguist. She is also one of Starfleet's best, and that's no joke. She sometimes is ridiculously good at her job, which is why Archer wants her for this mission. Hoshi declines at first because she's currently on leave and teaching a class, and she feels obligated to finish the course. But Archer tempts her with a Klingon recording, which I can only assume is like linguist porn. Archer asks if she can really pass up being the first person to talk to a Klingon. Even though she'd technically be the second person, the first one shot him like a varmint. Hoshi then changes her mind.
So in our next scene, we find out that part of the agreement between Starfleet and the Vulcans was that they would allow a Vulcan liaison on board. And it just happens to be the one member of the delegation that Archer physically threatened. This is T'Pol and her skin-tight outfit, and I'm so happy I get to talk about her. Ow! T'Pol is not the most liked character in Star Trek, and this scene goes a long way to illustrate why. The problem isn't that Archer and T'Pol have an antagonistic relationship when they first meet. We've seen countless examples of people getting off on the wrong foot and learning to work together. The problem is that they didn't handle it well. This really works when you can see both sides of the argument. We don't see this here. We only see Archer's side. And Archer comes off as an ass. As stated, when Archer first met T'Pol, he physically threatened her, which hurt his character for two main reasons. One, Vulcans are stronger than humans, he just have his butt handed to him. Two, of all the people there, he got the angriest with the only woman. It doesn't make him look like he has the moral high ground, it makes him look like a dick. Same thing goes for T'Pol. She is supposed to have her emotions under control, and yet she comes across as passive-aggressive, smug, and petty. Who could hate Porthos? I want to say none of this is the fault of Scott Bakula or Jolene Ballock. They just didn't have much to work with.
We have a quick scene where the Enterprise launches, and it's truly awe-inspiring to see Earth's first deep space vessel take flight. What could possibly ruin this historic moment? Oh yeah, the plot. We'll get more into this as more of the information gets revealed. The shadowy dude has been named Future Guy by fans since we never learn his real name. He tells Selleck, the green lumpy guy, to recover the Klingon. Yeah, okay, pal.
We finally meet the last member of the main cast, Dr. Phlox. Archer asked him to be his chief medical officer, and Phlox is eccentric, warm, and has a smile that would traumatize someone more than working on a film with Alec Baldwin.
Trip finds Mayweather sitting on the ceiling because he's in the sweet spot of the ship's artificial gravity. Okay, but if gravity is holding you there, how is it any different from sitting on the floor? He simply reminds us that he's been in space. Get used to that. That's basically Travis's character.
Here we have a scene that really ensures that the audience doesn't care for T'Pol. She, Archer, and Trip are having dinner together, and she doesn't eat her breadstick with her hands because Vulcans don't do that. Totally fine to have cultural differences. She's also a vegetarian. Again, totally fine. My issue here is that she criticizes human beings for being impulsive carnivores, despite the fact that both Archer and Trip have also eaten breadsticks, which, last I checked, aren't made of meat. Humans are omnivores, and she should know that. The only possible reason she would have to call them carnivores in such a negative way is to try to get under their skin. That's not being enlightened, it's being petty.
The following scene shows that Hoshi is a scaredy cat, afraid of every little shake. Although if I was traveling several times the speed of light with only a tin can to protect me from the vacuum of space, I'd be nervous as well. Anyway, the fearless Klingon warrior that got taken out by Elmer Fudd wakes up, so Archer and Hoshi head down to sickbay. Hoshi is having trouble with the translation, but considering she only first heard this language a few days ago, she's made hell of a lot of progress.
He says his wife has grown ugly.
Sounds like a Klingon Hallmark card. Anyway, the Green Man group comes in, shuts down the ship, and steals the giant Klingon with Starfleet security on hand to be useless. However, Archer was able to kill one of the intruders.
With the Klingon now gone, T'Pol points out to Archer that their mission is now technically over since they can't return something they don't have. Archer, however, is not one to let facts get in the way of things, so he wants them to find a ship that was able to completely shut them down without being detected, and was able to remove a 7-foot-tall angry Klingon that was tied down without making a single sound. Somehow he expects his crew to follow through, even though he was in such a hurry to prove he belonged out here, he left without a fully functional weapon system. I was expecting this to be a challenge!
Phlox is conducting an autopsy on the dead alien, and a scan of the DNA says he's a Suliban. Phlox then goes over all the different ways that he's been genetically altered. Wait, how did they genetically modify him without altering the DNA?
The eyes are my favorite. Compound retinas.
Okay, one, that's not the retina. What we see is the cornea, sclera, iris, and pupil. The retina is in the back of the eye. And two, what good is a compound retina? I understand the usefulness of a compound lens, but I can't even theorize what a compound retina would do. Leave your suggestions in the comments.
Anyway, Trip and T'Pol are arguing over how Enterprise's sensors weren't designed to scan for the Suliban warp trail. Trip tells her that she needs to work with the captain and that she should have some loyalty to the guy that threatened her, and she's only known him a week. That's when Hoshi arrives and tells everyone that she's been able to translate everything that Klang has said except for 4 words. Rigel is mentioned, and T'Pol says that it's a planet system that Klang's flight logs had him at before he crashed on Earth. Archer tells her to stop withholding information from them, even though she had no real reason to share that information before he was taken, and was tasked with looking for the attacking ship afterwards. There's just no pleasing some people.
Klang is getting tortured by Green Man Group, and Selleck is unable to get the information they need. However, Klang does mention Saren, which is one of the proper names Hoshi couldn't translate. I think it was about Saren working with the Reapers or something. Anyway, moving on.
Enterprise arrives, and Archer, T'Pol, Trip, Reed, Mayweather, and Hoshi are all headed down to the trading post. T'Pol and Trip start looking for something to help them with their search, while Reed and Mayweather completely forget why they're there, and stop to watch 2 nubile dancers eating butterflies. Guess they have a feeding fetish or something. Trip then sees a small child having trouble breathing, and his mother keeps taking the mask away from him. Trip gets angry, but T'Pol says that the mother is weaning her son and trying to get him to start breathing oxygen. Her pointing out that humans need to not jump to conclusions and to instead learn other alien cultures and ways of life would have been a great early moment for the show. if T'Pol herself hadn't shown that she's not embracing human ways of life and openly criticized Archer and Trip for eating steak. Rules for thee, but not for me, huh, T'Pol? Meanwhile, Archer and Hoshi get attacked by some Suliban, and Archer gets taken to meet with Saren. Hoshi gets thrown to a cell with Trip and T'Pol, who got captured off-screen. Archer meets Saren, and she is hot. Never mind. Due to her genetic augmentations, the kiss worked like a lie detector, so she now trusts Archer to a degree. This Suliban group are not working with the Green Man group that took Klang. Saren reveals that she gave Klang proof that the Suliban are manipulating the Klingons to attack other Klingon houses to provoke a war, because the Klingons really need to be pushed into that. Then Saren says that the Suliban aren't acting on their own accord. In exchange for getting genetic advancements, Green Man Group are...
They're simply soldiers fighting a temporal Cold War.
The temporal Cold War is the single biggest problem for this entire series. Let me explain. When you are dealing with the Cold War plotline, you need to have all the various factions well thought out. Who are they? What is everyone's goals? Why are these groups on this side of the war, and what do they hope to get out of it? What is keeping the Cold War cold? In other words, why isn't there any open fighting? What's keeping all the players at bay? It's fine not to over-explain all that to the audience from the beginning, but at least the creators should know all of that information. You can tell all kinds of stories while you set up all the political, economic, spiritual, and various other reasons for war. Then, once you explain where everybody is, turn the heat up. As if that's not enough, they then add time travel. Time travel is very complicated to write about, and to marry that to something as complex as a Cold War is incredibly difficult. If this was going to work, you needed to have at least a basic outline. Not full scripts or anything, but know exactly how all these players are related to each other, and why do people in the distant future need to interfere with these events. But they didn't do that. It was made up on the fly, and it really hindered the series.
Anyway, Saren and Archer get attacked by Green Man Group. Saren lets the others out, and in the escape she dies. Sadly, Saren doesn't have Reaper Tech to bring her back to life to fight the final boss. They make it back to the landing bay, but in the storm they're having a hard time seeing which way to go back to their shuttle. Apparently, after watching the dancing girls eating butterflies, Reed and Mayweather said, "Mission accomplished!" and just headed right back to the shuttle. Archer calls them, but since it's snowing, they're having a hard time communicating. Wait, so the communicators are able to talk crystal clear from the planet's surface all the way up to the ship in orbit, but they can't talk to people a few feet away because of some snow? Archer, I told you to switch from AT&T. Then an action scene starts, and our heroes start making their way back to the pod. Reed then says something stupid.
I've never seen lightning in a snowstorm before.
Now, yes, lightning snow does exist. However, my point is that as security chief, shouldn't he be seeing strange lights and think, oh, I don't know, weapons discharges? You know, since that's kind of his job and all that. While Mayweather is trying to scan for the away team, T'Pol does her best to look like a 90s Garfield plushie and sticks right to the window. Another ship takes off, and despite the air being blasted back down to the ground as only a mild annoyance for everyone else, it knocks T'Pol on her back and throws her several yards. Archer grabs T'Pol's phaser and goes all Hollywood action hero and gives her cover, but his bravado ends up getting him shot in the leg. Everyone else drags him on board and they take off. Archer passes out and we see him as a kid with his dad, who gives him some words of wisdom, I guess, and T'Pol is there to confuse the audience.
Now we get to some people's favorite moment of the episode, but nobody in this room's favorite moment.
Yes, dear.
Star Trek is no stranger to fan service, and neither am I. I've been watching anime for years. We've all seen Seven's catsuits or Kirk without a shirt on, but there is something different about the decon scene. And what I think it stems down to is how miserable T'Pol and Trip are. It's very shameless with how sex-driven the shots are. His pecs, her legs, his shoulders, her midriff, plus all that gel. It's all very sexually charged. But their conversation is bickering about who has command, and they clearly don't like each other at this point. They're not even awkward, which feels very unrelatable. I know I'd feel awkward. The visuals are there, but since the scene lacks emotions, whether lust or love or bashfulness, it feels flat and really cheap.
I just want to add, I have no problem with the idea of a decontamination chamber on board the ship. It's a simple way to ensure protection for the crew, after all. But the way it's used here is so blatantly sexual that it's clearly written by a horny 14-year-old. Oh, and we'll also see that decon makes little sense as it's nowhere close to sick bay.
Archer wakes up from his leg wound and sees that Phlox is treating it with a starfish. I guess he was all out of leeches. Archer is told that he was out for 6 hours and that T'Pol was in command while he was out. He immediately thinks the worst, but T'Pol as acting captain felt her job was to try to anticipate what Archer would want her to do. They are currently tracking the Green Man Group's ship that attacked them after they modified the sensors.
We see Archer in his cabin trying to figure out why T'Pol did something she disagreed with.
Have you ever known a Vulcan to return a favor? No. Neither have I.
Why? If you're in an alliance with someone, is it not logical to assist them so that you can expect them to assist you if you need it? It's logical to want to maintain a good and healthy relationships with your allies, Archer. They arrive at the planet and they realize that they haven't been following the warp trail of one Suliban ship, but 14 of them, and they all head into a gas giant's atmosphere. Archer says to bring the weapons online, it's time to go shooting. Then Archer says something stupid.
And polarize the hull plating.
Since the classic Star Trek use of shields does not exist yet, the creatives on Enterprise thought to polarize the hull instead of using, armor. The idea came from ceramics that gain a much higher strength when it's electrically charged. That's fine. But they'll say things like, hull plating down to 17%, or hull plating is offline. How can the hull be offline? If the hull plating is offline, then it's broken. There's a hull breach. The hull has been damaged and it needs repairs at some sort of dock or space station. They should have just used shields if they were going to treat the hull the exact same way.
The ship enters a layer of liquid phosphorus and starts to get bumpy. How the spaceship is able to fly in liquid is never stated, but whatever. Hoshi says,
You might think about recommending seatbelts when we get home.
It's just a little bad weather.
Why is it that the communications officer is the first person in Star Trek history to mention that basic safety feature? Anyway, they find a space station, kinda. It's several ships that are all interconnected to form this structure. The scans are inconclusive and they can't narrow down Klang's location. They don't trust the transporters, so they come up with Operation Yoink. They use the grappler to catch one of the Suliban ships and yoink! They plan to sneak aboard the Suliban station using the captured ship, but since there were multiple vessels nearby, the Suliban surely would have alerted the station which ship was taken, so they'd be ready for it. I'm just messing with ya. Of course they didn't do that, because that would require intelligence greater than that of Porthos.
So Travis is talking Trip through how to pilot the alien ship. How Mayweather knows how to fly this? I don't know. If Mayweather has already figured out how to fly this thing, and is the best pilot on board, Why is he not flying this mission? Also, why is Trip going to be the one flying it? Not only should the chief engineer be in engineering when in a combat situation, but need I remind everyone that Trip was the guy who did this? You expect this guy to fly an alien ship to an alien station in a combat zone? Great idea, Captain.
How complicated can it be? Up, down, forward, reverse? We'll figure it out.
Should be easy. Up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, bam! I've unlocked God mode.
T'Pol tells Archer that there is a Vulcan ship not far, and they could be here to assist in the upcoming battle. But Archer doesn't want to do that because of his ego. Reed arrives to get Archer a device that will cancel all the magnetic locks, and kinda sorta make the base fall apart. And off they go.
Meanwhile, Enterprise is getting bombarded with space depth charges that are sweeping the area. Well, this shouldn't be much of a problem since the bombardment began while Archer was still there, so of course he would have ordered the ship to move to safety after he left and met up at Rendezvous Point, and of course not! Because that would require a degree of foresight and common sense, so the crew just has to sit back and think of England while it takes its pounding.
Archer and Trip make it to the station, and while they begin to search for Klang, Enterprise finally realizes that being a stationary target is bad, so they move the ship. Klang is found, and he gives them the traditional Klingon greeting, a punch to the face. Archer points his phaser at him, and they come to an understanding. Klang is yelling at them and drawing attention of the locals. Trip and Archer start to set up the doohickey to the thingamabob that will demagnetize the station.
Klang attacks a Suliban that was coming up behind our heroes, and in true Klingon warrior fashion, doesn't grab the gun to start with the shooting. Archer tells Trip and Klang to get to the ship, and then the doohickey goes off. The station falls apart, and Archer either didn't have a plan to get off the station, or knew this was a one-way trip. All of which could have been avoided if Reed had simply made a remote for the doohickey.
Enterprise gets Trip and Klang on board, while Archer is playing hide-and-seek, I guess. Archer finds the temporal funky room. Trip is yelling at T'Pol to turn the ship around to pick up Archer, but T'Pol thinks the captain sent him away because he didn't want Trip to endanger the mission in order to save him. Which again begs the question, why didn't Reed set up the thing to detonate remotely, or give it a longer countdown than just 5 seconds?
Archer and Selleck have a heart-to-heart in the temporal funky room, and Selleck knows who Archer is. Dun dun dun. Selleck is using pure logic to get to the heart of the matter. He realizes that Saren mustn't have told him much if he still needed to get Klang, so he gives Archer the chance to leave. Okay, Archer, he doesn't think you know anything. Make sure you don't tip your hand.
This chameleon thing is pretty fancy. Was it payment for pitting the Klingons against each other? Or a trophy from your temporal Cold War?
You idiot. Selleck attacks him, and Archer's getting his ass handed to him because he's fighting a guy with enough modifications that would make the Kardashians blush. He shoots him, but timey-wimey stuff happens, and they resort to fisticuffs. And again, Archer isn't doing well.
Enterprise makes its approach, and Plan A was to dock in a combat zone. Whatever. Archer continues to have his face rearranged and starts to run and gets beamed away to the Enterprise at the last moment. They head back to Kronos and return Klang home. Turns out that Klang was carrying the Suliban plans in his blood, so he really didn't need to be alive. Oh well. The Klingons show their natural appreciation, and Archer and crew leave.
Archer has a debriefing with T'Pol and Trip and informs them that Starfleet sees no need to recall them and claims they are fit to continue their mission to explore the galaxy. Trip is excited, and Archer asks T'Pol to stay on board to serve as his first and science officer. He doesn't want to put in the request himself because that would show weakness. apparently, so he asked T'Pol to do it.
The episode ends on a hopeful note. They are optimistic about the future and eager to head to the stars. On the final lines, Mayweather points out that there is a storm ahead, and Archer says,
"We can't be afraid of the wind, Ensign. Take us to Warp 4.
So with them flying into the storm, Archer sets the precedent for the early days of the show by creating a lot of their own problems.
Final thoughts. We're going to give this episode a trope rating of 1 for terrible, terrible Starfleet security.
Best parts of the episode. We love the set. The design of the NX-01 actually feels like a precursor, unlike some Star Trek prequel series that will not be named here. The claustrophobic, metallic, submarine-inspired, complete with actual buttons, has a great feel. The instrumental music inside the show itself is also quite lovely. It does a good job of helping the episode feel all the right things at the right times.
And it's not the main theme song. The casting was also a great choice. Scott Bakula is a skilled actor that has shown many times that he can carry a series. He has the range and the charisma. All the other supporting cast works as well. Unfortunately, most of these actors didn't get much to work with. Archer was written as a hothead instead of the wide-eyed explorer with the childlike wonder of the new.
And that brings us to the bad. There was weak characterization, a plot that is simultaneously too simple and too complicated, too simple with the world building and too complicated with the temporal Cold War stuff.
Although we've knocked it around quite a bit, this pilot episode is not the worst of the series. A pilot is supposed to give an impression of what the show it should be about. In that respect, this is a pretty decent representation of what the show is like, for all the good and bad that entails. Computer, save file, and end transmission.
Affirmative. Processing. Terminating. Transmission. Ending. Communication.